So I think that's excellent background,
Yeah.
which then begs the question, what's gone wrong? When did things start going wrong? Is it the board? Is it the executive leadership? I think there's been, really long-term players in this. I don't know who would be best to take. Maybe Chris, if you want to touch on this, like when do you think the rot started to set in?
Well, like John would say, probably a very long time ago, and part of that has to do with what we just spoke about with the lack of structure. Clearly, I mean, they have obligations with the board and how they manage and how they govern themselves, but they weren't meeting that. I mean, we've had now in the last couple of years where they didn't have the requisite number of board members, and it didn't seem like anybody was overseeing that to say, well, wait a second, you're not meeting your obligations here as to how this funding works for you, so we're not going to give you the funding. I mean, you get in a situation like that where it gets difficult to do that, but to answer your question, I guess holistically, everything's wrong with it, right? There's not just one thing, but you've got it's clearly a bunch of characters now in there who have these personality conflicts with one another that can't seem to focus on the important job, which is representing, at-risk Territorians who don't have a legal challenge, anywhere. They need to have their legal rights protected when they appear before a judge, and they're forgetting their responsibility to Indigenous Territorians and getting more caught up in what it seems like office politics. I mean, some of these accusations that they were throwing around at Priscilla Atkins there was just wild stuff, and then she was throwing stuff back at them, and it just was like, you just got the sense, I did, John, I remember talking to you, no one's going to win here. No one's going to come out looking clean in this, and the ones who lose the most are the ones that they're supposed to be representing.
That's right. People languishing on remand.
Yeah, which is just a terrible situation all around. But from what I've seen and what we've covered and reported on, I mean, this is some pretty seriously dysfunctional people who somehow found themselves together. It's like an old CLP government or an old Labour government where we said, how did all of these people
in the
find themselves together somewhere? But this seems to be what's happened at NAAJA.
There's a virus going around the Western world, or at least the English-speaking world, which we're all really suffering under, and that is that there's no accountability, whether it's the banks, the robo-debt. This thing has emerged in the last 20, 30 years of our life, whereby people who are in positions of power can basically lie their proverbials off, stuff up to massive extents, and they don't get brought to book, unless, of course, they're an Aboriginal delinquent that stole a car. They still face accountability, and they go to Don Dale. But this disease across the English-speaking world is everywhere, and it's actually explains to an extent NAAJA, because they are acting with such hubris, such arrogance, such privilege. They consider themselves untouchable. And I'm talking about the individuals that are in this board, or at least the ones that run the board.
Right.
A lot of the board members don't know really what's going on at all, but they attend because they represent a geographical region. But the characters that are in there consider themselves untouchable. I mean, the very fact that NAAJA this week released that media release saying that they apologized unreservedly and so forth to their opponent whom they alleged against. And the extent of that groveling apology would have demanded in any institution immediate resignations from them, because they were basically admitting to spending 2 years plus, spending millions on lawyers on allegations which they were now conceding were they resiled from them completely. So you don't get a bigger stuff up than that, other than, of course, the indirect ones, which are deaths in custody, kids in Don Dale, we don't have lawyers, men and women in jail that have been on remand for 12 months and haven't seen the lawyers. This is how the mismanagement manifests itself at the coalface, which is as important as anything. So you've just got A to Z on mismanagement and malfunction. And that's why I've been saying now enough's enough. And I blame now Dreyfus, because he knows all of this and more, and he hasn't got the political courage to say this organization has to be hosed out. The bridge of this ship needs to be completely hosed out. The board, upper management, the senior lawyer, they all have to go because they have failed miserably, and they have to be replaced with people that can do the job. And that triggers the next question, which is self-determination. And this is where this board has been really disgraceful, because they have provided ammunition for the right wing of politics who are always undermining self-determination. They have provided the perfect bazooka for the Duttons of this world to say, well, I told you so. Self-determination is a joke. It's historical. It has to go, which I don't believe in. I agree with self-determination. As long as you've got the right people who are qualified, have the integrity, the industry, and the commitment, which they had in the past. So they all have to go.
Right. So that said, does that I understand that NAAJA is made up of Indigenous board members,
Totally,
members,
100%.
and you talk about self-determination, but also having the best people in the best roles to allow the best outcomes.
Exactly.
Is it an option then for NAAJA to open the board up to people outside of Aboriginality to try and sort of broaden that talent pool?
Yeah,
which will then result in those better outcomes.
This political requirement has allowed non-Indigenous lawyers,
right,
necessarily, because there aren't enough qualified, experienced gun lawyers, which is what you want.
Yep.
When you're running an organization like this, bearing in mind its importance, you have to go for the pursuit of excellence. You need the best managers. You need the best administrators. You need the best board members. You need the best principal lawyer. You need the best lawyers in crime, civil, and family, if you've got a family. You need the best, because Aboriginal people are the most exposed and the most vulnerable. Now, this organization pursues nothing. And now it's just chronic. It's just absolute chronic.
Well, but that's
it's
the
mediocrity.
problem, though, isn't it? Is what Stuart's saying about not having the right people in there. I mean, what was the turnover? How many chairs have they had now? Like in the past 18 months, it's crazy. But the principal lawyer too. I remember last year one of them quit, and the other lawyers were saying, "Well, we're not sure we can even go in and do our jobs anymore because you need that indemnity insurance from the principal lawyer."
Yeah, that's right.
And they didn't have anyone for a while. And there was a point where there was like 3 lawyers when there should have been 20 or something.
That's right. There's been an exodus of lawyers.
Where do you get the better people for this? Like,
well, you need the as a lawyer, it's the best job in town.
Right.
If you've got the stamina and the wherewithal to be able to do it, and you can't do it for long. I did it for 5 years. I reckon it was too much. It is a very taxing job, but it also brings great satisfaction and great experiences and so forth. So you can get the best lawyer. Traditionally, and we didn't mention this, but the NAAJAs and the CALASs, they used to get the best lawyers in town, and they weren't in town. They were from Melbourne, they were from Adelaide, they were from Sydney.
Yep.
They attracted QCs en masse to come up and do work at limited, if not free rates, because of the cause, because of the need, all of that. But if they're going to come up and they're looking at an organization that's managed by people who don't know what day it is, who have no real bona fides about the whole thing, it's not going to happen. And this has been happening now for at least 10 years or more. You're not getting quality lawyers going near the joint, and you can understand why.
But does opening up NAAJA to a broader talent pool, does that then empower the narrative that, again, rights are being taken away from Aboriginal people and they're not managing their own affairs? So you mentioned the right undermining self-determination. Does that then open up to attacks from the left about Indigenous positions of power maybe being outsourced outside of Aboriginal circles? How does that?
It will. I mean, I speak to lawyers now of my vintage and even younger who won't have a bar of criticising NAAJA because it's politically incorrect. They won't criticise the blackfella organisation.
Right.
And yet I'm at the coalface. They're not. They're in Melbourne and Collins Street. And what's going on here is Don Dale. What's going on here is people on remand for 18 months. What's going on here is no lawyers. What's going on here is gross mediocrity and mismanagement, and Aboriginal people are being punished and all their families. So that's the reality. So one thing that we have to consider here is I agree with self-determination because I can remember from my own experience, the board was dynamite when I worked for NAAJA. Pat Anderson was the chairman of the board. Ursula Raymond was on it. Really dynamic Aboriginal men and women who wanted to do the right thing by their community. But I question where is the Aboriginal community in the top end or even in the territory generally? Why aren't they coming out and saying, get rid of this, we'll take over, move over? I don't know if it's there, to be realistic.